Oh, hey, I'm Pete Moorbacher. Every week I get here and I on the Huckleberry Art Discord, and I do a little class called Basics of Digital Painting. Sometimes it's about the basics of digital painting. Sometimes it's me running, mad scientist experiments on you guys to see what kind of teaching free students will tolerate. I think that's one of these weeks. I had a big idea. All right, you can't blame me for having a big idea. And clearly this idea was not resonating. I think I need a lead through demonstration on this one. This is I had this thing. I thought it was clear. I'm on my own planet. So thanks for putting out with me. We're gonna have a way more normal assignment this week. So you're not gonna have to deal with trying to like read the tea leaves and figure out what the hell I'm even asking. Oh, first time catching the stream. Nice to see you. All right. So I've got slightly fewer pieces than usual, but I always run over time, so maybe this is the right number of pieces to crit. The way this works is that if you see your stuff up on the screen, you can raise your hand, and you can come up on stage and chit chat with me. If you're not here, or you don't have a mic, or you don't want to talk, that's all fine. I will do my best to give a critique anyway. And if you want to participate in the class, all you need to do is do the homework and then drop it in the homework channel. I'm going to link it here on the Discord right now. And I'm trying this thing out where I give the homework at the beginning of the class as well as at the end. So I'm going to go over the next week's homework really quick. And then we're going to get to the trees. All right. All right. So I'm going to upload it here, and then I'm going to upload it on the homework channel in a little bit. So this is the piece for this week. This is a really basic figure study sort of situation. One of the things I want to try is take a colorful image, and then I want you to reproduce this in black, white, and then one color. Pick any color. One color challenge. You can blend them. You can render, but you want to do red highlights? You want to just do the parts that are red on here and then everything else is grayscale? Do you want to pick out just the blues and everything else is grayscale? Do you want to like have the areas that are red be the highlight color, but you want that highlight color to be orange? Also fine. It's all fine. The main thing is you got to do a study of this piece, and you've got to use grayscale and then one accent color. One accent color to try to make like a cool composition just using an accent color, doing it from a full color image. It's not that complicated. I hope. If there's any questions, I'll take questions at the end of this thing. In the meantime, I got Marco's piece up here. I see Marcos in the chat. So we used to use the accent color only where it is in the photo. Nope. Wherever you want to use it, do a study of this photo and then only do it grayscale with one accent color. Any way you want to use that accent color, feel free to be creative about it. And that is not going to scare everybody off and make them not want to do the assignment. This is going to be a regular one, so everyone's going to get some nice practice in this week. Marcos, are you available to come on stage? Can you raise your hand? Ah, sweet. Great. I'm going to have a perfect suite this week. Hey, Marcos, how's it going?
All right. Hi, thanks. Now I'm connected from my cell phone, which has a better mic than my computer. Hope you can hear me better.
You're coming through great.
Nice.
All right. So, you said you spent 2-3 hours across a couple of different sessions.
Yeah, no, a couple of sessions of about 2 to 3 hours. So I would say about 5 hours on the whole piece.
Yep.
And yeah, most of my points are there in the message. I would like to know what's your opinion on the edge work of the foliage in general, especially on the foreground, as well as the other things that I left right there. So
you said you ended up with a very static composition, felt like could have played more with the big tree shape. Lastly, I wanted to understand how to incorporate more depth into my paintings. And then you say, I believe studying perspective is the way to go. So with this piece, okay, I'm going to pull up the reference image here. Obviously, this is not a picture of a tree, right?
Yeah.
I think this got people where they're like, oh, well, that's not a tree. So how do I turn it into a tree? Um, I wanted to, I wanted to get this out, and you're the first person, so I'm gonna lay it on you.
Yeah.
Pulling up some other reference images of forested environments here, and you can see when you see a bunch of trees at a distance, you don't really see a lot of the trunks. It's really just a
That's
big
right.
big lump of leaves, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, I was like, oh, great. Well, you're going to turn these big fiery lumps into big green lumps because
Okay.
you don't actually need to add anything. You just need to make them a different color and, like, give them a sense of lighting and give them a little bit of texture. There's not a lot you would need to change about this image, I think, in order to make it trees. And because I'm thinking about trees as just like I'm imagining seeing them very large scale and at a distance. And you're asking about like a sense of distance and perspective. We don't really have perspective in this scene because even though we know we're seeing something that's big scale and there's like a lot of atmosphere and you definitely get a sense that it's big, but we don't have like converging lines of perspective on this piece. So we're not really able to use a lot of the conventional tools of perspective to work our way through this and figure out how to make it like a certain size, a certain scale, right? Clearly there's
Yep.
other tools at play to make this feel like it's big. And I think that you're actually utilizing one of those tools here, which is you're trying to create overlap between the foreground and the background. And you're using a different contrast, you're using different colors, and you're even using some of this atmospheric distortion here, some mist between the layers to try to give it a little bit of extra distance.
That was my intention. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I think the big thing I would consider here, and let me see if I can pull this up too and get them on the screen at the same time. There we go. That worked out perfectly. Okay. My perspective on this is like, I was kind of expecting everybody to just keep the overall structure of this. And you can see how we're getting really different lighting between the foreground and background. And even though these explosions sort of lit from the inside, we can kind of imagine like a lighting where it's maybe there's only like some light that's on the foreground. So we might see just like some brighter colors happening here in the foreground as we get like a lot of light on them. And then maybe
Okay.
there's some areas that are largely darker. But like you've broken them down into like smaller individual tree pieces. But one of the reasons I want to show off this explosion is because it doesn't really show, we can't get lost in the idea of individual branches and leaves. We're looking at is lumps, like clouds almost, right?
Right.
And so I really think that that's the place to start and to think about how we're lighting these big lumps and what's the rhythm of these big lumps. Because if you were to give like a very particular lighting treatment just to this foreground here, maybe you see like just some more light splashing on this side, and there's areas where there's some shadow being cast on it. We're going to get this sense of, some lumps of foliage that are kind of medium distance from us. And then we've got this big guy in the back, and this thing is so big, it doesn't even fit on the screen. Right?
Okay.
And so one of the reasons why I think you're feeling like your thing might be a little small is because you have made it smaller. We are able to make a big giant tree that is going completely off the screen. And we're seeing the lighting treatment on this is actually going to be a bit different. We're maybe seeing just some more indirect light. We're not getting the kind of daylight shining on it like we are in the foreground. Maybe there's a cloud that's passing overhead, and that cloud is shining across this giant tree. It's a giant cloud that's shining across this giant tree. and it's going to be seen at a different distance, and it's going to be seen at a different scale, partially because of the rhythm of all the lumps, and partially because the lighting is going to be treated differently. I mean, that's what I'm seeing in this image here. And
Okay.
then, behind it, we don't need to define the sky too much. There's just a little bit of it up here. And if you wanted to maybe give it a little bit of atmosphere, put that sky color in front of it. Clearly, you can see that this is a very dark cloud because at the base of it, we see a lot of this darkness, but at the top, we get this glare, we get atmosphere. And so just reusing a lot of what's already in the reference image, I think starts to create a clearer sense of how to establish those
Of course.
layers
Yeah.
and that sense of size. One of the things that we get here also is in between like this background area that is much larger and looser and the foreground area that's got a lot more detail and a lot more lighting on it is this middle ground where we see these like smaller, clumpier bits. And the smaller, clumpier bits, they are providing a little bit of extra perspective to the overall scene.
Yeah, it gives it a nice scale to it.
Yeah. And so I'm imagining these as being like, very large trees that we're seeing at a distance.
Yep.
And then the thing over the top of it has to be gigantic because if these are big trees in the distance, then the thing that's coming over the top of it has to be huge, like gargantuan. That's one of the big tools for establishing scale that I always like is that if you can get a sense of like the texture of this, I haven't really gotten in the texture. I'm just using my round brush right now. But if you can
Yep.
get a sense of the texture and scale of the foreground here, and then we get this middle ground where it's like, oh, it's kind of like those trees. They're about the same size, but now they're kind of getting small because we're moving further away. Then when there's something else that looms over the top of that, something that's so big, so gargantuan that it dwarfs these things we already know are really large, and it's further in the background, meaning that it's like, it should be even smaller. Perspective should be making it even smaller, and yet here it is. It's gigantic. It's huge. That's going to create that epic sense of scale.
I love it. Yeah, that's right. It reads so much. The
So
sizes with just the sizes and
it's
the small little details there.
I'm not really making edits to your piece here. I'm just kind of painting a different study on top of it.
It's okay.
That's my thoughts on looking at this reference image of like what I'm seeing in it. I didn't do a demonstration of it. If I'm ever going to give this assignment again, I'm going to do a demo so that it's more clear because I feel like the ideas that I had here, I feel like there's layers where we're seeing trees that are almost totally in shadow, while other ones are kind of catching a secondary light. And the way in which
Yeah.
these different lights are hitting it across these different, planes of parallax, where we get this sense that this thing is so huge and looming over the top of it. You might even
Yeah.
think that some of these little lumps here are entire trees, right?
Yep.
And so you could be drawing in like trying to express the idea that these are whole treetops and they're all kind of clustered together in this big giant mass over the top of it.
Yeah, I definitely got out of the reference after like the sketching and stuff, and then I just began doing the forest that I imagined. Uh, I it yeah, the example that you made, getting closer to the reference, taking all the explosion clouds as actual like different trees is it helps a lot with the scale of the image.
Great. I'm glad it's coming through clear. We got some people in here from Twitch today. Welcome, Twitch people. Thanks for the rate, Parachena. And thanks for the sub from Blackberry Bush. This is funny. I just turned the Twitch thing back on. I've been doing this for weeks. I'm very happy to come up with an excuse to be back on Twitch again. And then we're getting some spam, it looks like. All right, great. Any questions for me?
No, that was pretty clear. Thank you very much for having me and for taking a look at my work. Uh,
Well, thanks for
Thank
doing
you
the
very
homework.
much.
I really appreciate you taking a swing at it.
It was great fun.
All right,
Thank you.
great. All right, Kathy. Is Kathy here? Hey, Kathy.
Hello.
Hey, I want to say you were somebody who did one of the closest to the reference images of anybody this week.
Yay.
Yay! So, what was your experience like with it? You said you really struggle with drawing dynamic energy.
Yeah, I like to do a lot of like brush work to go and like push a lot of like dynamic things in like my regular work because I try and incorporate like a lot of things like my synesthesia, but just like
Mhm.
they look flat even with that. And I'm like, with this, I really tried to figure out how can I make this look like it has like foomph. I don't know how to like
Foomph.
use a normal word to
I got
describe
you.
it, but
I get it. I feel you. All right, let's talk about the foomph. I think that this is one of those cases where looking at it's like you feel like it's got to be about getting in there and getting more leaf texture, right? Like, there's going to be a billion little leaves. So if I'm really going to get the feeling of them, I've got to get in there and get the texture. And so it's got to be like going in and making lots of little tiny brush strokes. But I think that what the feeling you're looking for is actually the view that you get when you zoom out, make it super tiny, and get far away from it. Because if we look at some of the trees that I've got pulled up here, if you squint and stand back a little bit, you can start to see the way in which the light kind of accumulates in on one side of it, and then it like kind of falls off. There's actually a bit of a gradient to the whole thing. It's got this softness to it where we see, the light kind of accumulating on one side and then falling off on the other. There is like a larger scale. And so I'm just using a soft brush here to try to add some volume, bring in some volume. And I'm just trying to loosely sketch it out as like a demonstration. But when I'm trying to make this feeling for stuff, I usually try to get it in as early as possible. And I will use the soft brush early on to try to establish this because it's so easy to get locked in and then zoom in really close and tight on an image to try to get everything right on like the small scale. But it's so easy to lose the larger volume on the bigger scale of things. And when you can balance the two and get that texture of all the leaves and do all the brushwork on it while it's in the context of this larger, softer, these within these like larger, softer transitions that are happening kind of slowly over the course of the canvas. Like when you're zoomed in working on something, accidentally mega zoomed there. You don't usually see a lot of that in there. You really only notice a lot of that softness, those like softer, larger shapes at a distance. And I that's one of the reasons I like to keep the navigator up is because I can usually see when I'm like using too much soft brush or if I haven't built out enough of that kind of soft volume to the shapes. Does this make sense? This track for you?
yeah, I was doing that when I was doing like my grayscale, but I
Mm-hmm.
think I lost it like after I did the gradient map and like the detailing.
Aha. Yeah, one of the reasons I like to work that way is because um, once I get to the point where I'm doing detailing, I try to change as little as possible because it's really easy to kind of step on some of the subtle choices that you're making earlier in the process. And it's something that you need to constantly be checking for. Worst case scenario, if you find that like you've really smushed everything down and flattened it, take a layer. Sometimes I'll use soft light to help with this. Soft light will be good at sometimes at building out volume without messing up any fine grained detail. Unlike I'm using a normal layer here, and you can see how much it's destroying the detail, and it's really flattening out the contrast. You can get some of that additional volume back without flattening that stuff quite so badly using a soft light layer. So I'll do that as like an emergency patch kind of later in the process sometimes.
Alrighty, thank you.
Great. Any questions for me?
Yeah. One thing that I was kind of worried about is I was worrying like that the third tree, like the tiniest one on like the bottom left, was looking under rendered. And
Mhm.
like without me mentioning that, did you see that or did you think it was apparent?
No, I mean, I didn't really notice the lack of rendering. Like, I think, you're talking about the one in the bottom left here?
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, no, it's off in the bottom corner. It's fine.
Alrighty, that was
Not a
just
big,
a side thing, but thank you so
yeah,
much.
not a big deal. I really actually appreciate when people leave some areas a little bit looser. I think a balance of detail to like draw focus to particular parts of a painting, even with a study, can do a lot to enhance its overall like vibe. I think that trying to do equal amounts of texture and detail over the whole image can be, I mean, it can be a very specific look, but I don't think it's what we're going for most of the time. So I would seek out opportunities to under render areas as both a matter of efficiency as well as like a matter of aesthetics.
Alrighty, thank you. That's what I was trying to do, and I'm glad it was successful.
Great, fantastic. All right.
Alright, thank you
Next,
so much. Bye bye.
thank you, Kathy. Next up, we got Jim's. Jim here. Oh, I don't see Jim. It might be this is our this. I was like, oh, we're gonna have everyone's gonna be here to come on stage this week, but it's okay. All right. So Jim says, can't look this anymore. Perspective really gave me a hard time on this one. Time to study some trees later. I thought we were studying trees. I'm sorry. This was clearly I was looking. I went to go look through the homework channel and I saw so many comments that were like people going like, "Oh, I can't do it this week. Can't do it this week." And Delia was like, "Is nobody doing it this week?" Or somebody was. I was like, I've clearly given out an assignment that is tough for people. But Jim, I thought you did a great job on this. One of the things that I really like about your treatment of this piece is the way that you have defined your lumps. Um, you've got these darker edges on them, and it creates this nice overlap to give a sense of scale and overlap inside your image here, and I think it looks really good. And I don't think it's even if you were to have taken my recommendation from earlier and not really shown the tree, but instead shown just like more clusters of leaves up here, and not really shown a trunk at all. I think this still reads more like leaves than like an explosion, and I'd even with like you keeping the color palette pretty similar to the original. Um, let me take a quick look at. I'm just gonna take my hue saturation here and mess with it a little bit. Yeah, I guess you can't just fully change the. See, even if we go into the green area here, I think like this may be doable. The value shifts, or the not the value, the hue shifts you have here at bringing these reds in the darker parts is really nice. It's this sort of thing that like one of these hue shifts is always going to screw up. The color in the background tree is kind of looking good, and these foreground trees are looking radioactive. But I think that if you this is the kind of start that I think is I think this is a really successful start. I think that you clearly understood what the assignment was at a time when lots of other people were struggling, which is great to see. We're on the same wavelength. Whatever is wrong with my brain is wrong with your brain too. And it's not going to work. There we go. So I think you've laid out a really strong base here. And the next step is to go in and start to define just smaller secondary shapes that are built on top of this. Like because you already have these, I'm going to take away this filter. Because you already have such like interesting colors established on the canvas, and because you have these like larger shapes so clearly established, the next step in my mind is to just go in there and find some more smaller secondary shapes. Let's see. Oh, me and another guy both blew a meeting today. on each other. Didn't show up on my calendar, and he blew the date. So I just discovered that. So I would go in and find some of these smaller secondary shapes and just do the exact same thing that you've done again, but smaller. And if you can, because I think that you've gotten this sense of energy on these big ones, this big one especially, you can see the explosiveness of it, like the way that these kind of making these pizza slices here that are like all like bursting away from the center. This is exactly what happens with a tree. And so if you can go in and find some smaller secondary shapes, you can start to get pretty precise about them. I'll probably use it like a textured brush for something like this, but I'll go in and start to like carve in some sharper areas of contrast to find where the edges of these clusters are. And then you can go in and find like some other little bits. Sometimes I'll try to like carve out a little chunk like that in dark, but other times it might be easier to go and add like a little light bit and do these kind of little fish scale shapes and stuff to add additional like secondary shapes onto it. Take a look at some tree reference or onto the explosion reference and see whether you want to add like a little dark bit or a little bit of light bit, or like maybe as each of these layers forms, they form like a little edge like this. You can paint up a little edge to subdivide these shapes a little bit more. But once you have this big stuff established, all you need to do is start to carve in a couple little secondary things without painting over the whole thing. And you can get something that has that same lively energy of your early sketches, but bring in a layer of tight detail. And while that might seem really daunting when you have all of these lumps all in one spot, I find the process to be quite zen. So personally, I'm willing to commit a lot of time to this sort of thing. But I found that like once you find a little flow for it, this stuff starts to come together pretty fast. If you can find the right like rhythm for adding secondary shapes and tightening up edges, you can just sort of fall into it and blow through it pretty quickly. And like if you do what I was saying to Kathy earlier, which is to focus the detail on particular parts and let other parts remain painterly and loose, I would say where you have it right now is a good level of looseness. So you just need to pick a few places to tighten in the detail and create a focus, and you got yourself a really successful painting. So congrats, Jim. Great job. Thanks for participating. I'm going to move on to the next person. Let's see. We've got Amanda. Amanda's here, right? Amanda's usually here. There's Amanda.
Hello.
Hey, Amanda. How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Going pretty good. How was your experience working on the assignment?
Mostly pretty zen. I got into a good groove and just went with it.
Fantastic. What was, so you started off, I got your process here. You started off with things pretty loose, and they're closer to the original reference, and then pretty quickly started to deviate by building in like these walls, these rock walls, and then the tree trunks and the roots. Tell me about that a little bit.
I wanted to get the big shapes in first. That was my first image. And then as I was kind of looking at it, I just like, I see this in the image. So I just ran with it and was having a, let's just take it wherever it's going to go moment.
Yeah. I saw a lot of that this week. So clearly there's a desire for it. I don't know. I personally see all the shapes needed to make a successful landscape image here in the reference, but making it into your own thing is fine as well. Where do you think things were most successful, and where do you think they're least successful?
I was relatively happy with how the like larger tree and getting the atmospheric feeling in there, trying to get some form of size. But I think everyone else had this issue too. The trees in the foreground were a little tricky, where what's over rendered, what's too little, what's too much, what's the balance. It looks like clouds, doesn't look like trees.
Yeah, what do you think of the difference between like this is a good question. Like what's the difference between a cloud and a tree?
They both
Visually.
have that kind of poofiness, right? But I think trees can at a certain distance have the spikiness of the leaves, whereas clouds are a
Yeah.
bit more smoother.
I think like oh my god, my mouse wheel's broken. And when I zoom in, like half the time it rolls down. I got a new one coming. Yeah, at a distance I feel like there's like a little bit of extra spikiness between like a tree and a cloud, but they have I think the thing that is because like on this image we can see like these really distinct points and spikes that you don't typically see on a cloud. The cloud's edges tend to be a lot more firm, though at the right distance some types of trees actually do have a very firm cloud-like edge. It's like the texture of them is a bit different. There's this noise in the tree, and then I think the other thing is that the light moves through the shapes differently. I think if I had to pin down what the difference between a tree and a cloud is visually, I think it's the way that the light kind of rolls across the surface of it. Because one of the things that I'm seeing inside these references is that as we look into the tree, there are these gaps facing straight onto us that get relatively dark. That the gaps between there's these areas where we see like the leaves kind of forming together to make a like a lump, and then sometimes where there's a gap we see these deep dark pits, and then sometimes those pits go far enough through where we see daylight on the other side of them if there's sky on the other side of the tree. So it's like it's not just like a solid lump. It's like there's a solid lump, but then it periodically has like these Swiss cheese holes in it that either, that show what's on the other side, whether that be shadow or light. And so, with a cloud, we get a lot of refraction inside of it, while the tree seems to be almost doing the opposite. It's like swallowing up a lot of the light on the outside of it. We're getting a lot of glowing halos, and like you can see these sort of thin, we see these kind of like thinner shapes just kind of running along the tops. And I think we see some of this in the reference as well, where you get these like kind of thin, kind of hollowed out, sort of skeletonized highlights. And I think that ends up being something that is very tree-like. And then if we're looking into it, if we see a gap between the lumps, we're going to be seeing some really distinct holes passing through it. My phone's blowing up too. All right, I'm getting tons of messages during the class today. So there's like a bit of a different, what do you call it? A shader. Like in games, in game production these days, you put different shaders on stuff to be able to make the materials. It's not just about the surface texture. It's also about the kind of overall procedural way in which light is affected by the material. And so I had never really thought about this. I guess I have one kind of in my brain, like a process for how I paint trees. It's like they can be any shape in the same way that clouds can be any shape, and they're lumpy the way that clouds are lumpy. But the actual way in which light kind of rolls across their surface is significantly different from how clouds behave. So even if we're imagining the same kinds of lumpy shapes, and I think this is part of the reason why I wanted to do this assignment, is because a lot of the kinds of lumps you see in clouds or explosions are more or less equivalent to the noise pattern that form the outer, form of a big tree. The trees themselves, they just they reflect light differently. And there is no exact right answer to that because I didn't provide a reference for it. I think I'm slowly piecing together why people had a hard time staying close to the original reference on this assignment now. But yeah, I think that might be the one thing is like if you found yourself struggling with trying to get it to feel like a tree and not like a cloud or like a rolling green ball of smoke. I think the answer is not so much in the way that like individual leaves are formed, or, let's say on this tree we might have lots of little spiky protrusions. Like maybe we do, maybe we don't. Definitely plenty of trees have this. I don't think it's in the fine details. I don't think that whenever something feels like it's off, it's not due to the balance of details being off. It's always something in the broad strokes. So trying to get more granular about the texture of it is never the first thing I would reach for. So if you were to go through and add really fine texture to define smaller clumps of leaves, and you were to go in and draw individual sticks for tree branches around places, I think at the end you would still feel the exact same way that you do about this piece right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so if at any point in the future you find yourself feeling like something is off in general and not in specific, then I want you to look for solutions that are general and not specific. I want you to look for way in which you can change the way that you're thinking about the problem, because it's like I did not anticipate this coming up as a thing. There is a fundamentally different way in which trees are reflect light. And if you can do a bunch of tree studies and start to get a handle on it, oh man, every time learning a new material like that always is such an uphill climb, because the first couple of times you do it, you just feel like your brain can't handle it. Like it's incompatible. And then at some point it clicks and you think you're getting it, but it's like fading in and out. Like you get up to refresh your tea and you come back and your painting looks like shit. And you thought you were on a good track and then it looks terrible. And then the next time you do it after that, it just like makes sense and it just feels natural and you're not even working that hard. It just kind of like looks right when you do it. And there's definitely something that happens in the hand or like in the subconscious, something that's outside of your direct control, where it's not learning to render a new material like this is not the sort of thing that you have like a conscious breakthrough on. It's something that I think comes through subconsciously through repetition. And when it clicks, it clicks. So if the big answer here is like, try doing some more studies of environments that have like foliage and things in them, or try drawing some foliage from imagination to see if you can get this through. Because I don't think it has to do with the details. I don't think it has to do with the texture. I'm going kind of philosophical on you today. Does any of what I'm saying make any sense? There's a decent chance.
It makes a lot of sense.
Okay, good. Okay. Any other questions for me or things that you came across that you would like to talk about?
No, I think you nailed my questions there.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Last one for today. We have Dr. Sensible, who I saw here earlier, but maybe he got bored and left. That's entirely reasonable. Dr. Sensible, let's see. You said, I'll be the first post for homework then. Yeah, you're the first one to jump in and take on the challenge. I definitely struggled with this one. I tried to have it be at sunset and autumn to play closer to the original explosion color, which only kind of worked the way I wanted. Working with foliage is something I'm not very good at yet, so this is a great learning exercise and showed me some gaps in my skill set I can try to fill in the future. I think you got the right attitude about this. The way that you've built the bark, like there's been a lot of the entries, we're adding a big tree trunk to the larger tree at the top. And I would say broadly, when people are doing that this week, they're adding way too much tree trunk. As I was showing in some of these references, when you see a really big full tree, unless you're standing right underneath it, you typically don't see a lot of the structure of the bark. You end up seeing just the outer foliage. And you've struck a nice balance here by just showing peaks of it, which give a good sense of overlap. I like that there is the separation here between this foreground, these foreground leaves, and then this the trunk here in the background. I think that combined with the way that the branches are kind of all emanating upward along the same lines of action that we're kind of getting out of the explosion, like the same, and then we're seeing that pay off here, these overlapping lumps, that we're seeing that force going up and out of the tree. And that's being reinforced by the branches. So I think that looks pretty good. The color seems to be a place where you're struggling. I personally think it's like, it might seem easier to stick closer to the original colors in the reference, but maybe it's just me, but I actually think it's kind of easy to just recalibrate. Just presume you're like, okay, purple equals green now. And just kind of gradient map it in your head. What colors of the original, if the original reference is orange, well, I guess now orange is green. And it sounds like a bit of a jump, but the human brain is totally capable of doing it. It's much easier than trying to do something like this, that what I'm trying to do, trying to like hue shift it back to a point where it looks natural and not horribly radioactive. It's easier to do it. And once you get like once you get the shapes from the reference, but then apply the colors from your own original creation, it's really easy to map the two together. I think it's easy to map the two together. And if you haven't done it before, both for you personally, but also anyone in the audience, feel free to give it a try. I don't think it's tough. I think it's an essential skill for working from reference, because whenever we use reference in imaginative illustration, we typically don't just trace things perfectly. You're not going to find the exact photo of what you need. You're going to have something that is maybe the right shape, but it's the wrong color. Or it's like the right face, but from the wrong perspective. Or, the lighting is off, or something. Like, we want to try to get some of the elements correct for a reference that we're using, but we're never going to just find an image that is a photo of the painting idea we had in our hand, and now we can just copy it. That's not going to ever arrive. And so we need to figure out how to reinterpret the stuff that we see in photos to build on our imaginative illustration. So I think it's a worthwhile practice to get into, even if you're something that you're a little bit daunted by. It's a super useful skill for imaginative. What I'm gonna do here is I'm masking out that hue shift that I did, because I realized I could get the brown of the bark back in, keeping the original color. Anyways, I think that if you were to push to do this as a daylit scene and depart more from the reference, keeping the overall structure what you have, I think you would find yourself having a lot of fun, and I think it would be a kind of challenge that you can really get on top of. I'm starting to get nervous every time anybody mentions gradient maps in the chat, because I'm like, am I gradient map pilling everybody? Am I poisoning everyone against like better, more intuitive ways of working with color, turning them into, people who are just following my totally insane way of dealing with color? But anyways, so I want to re-go over the homework really quick for people. The reference, I'm about to upload it in the, I'm realizing that across multiple different spots here with Twitch and with Discord, let's see, I forgot how to, Dustin, can you link to the it's discord.gg/Huckleberry is the Discord server. And there is a homework channel in there. And I'm going to upload that over there right now. The challenge for this week is to take this and do it grayscale with one accent color. That accent color could be red, it could be purple, it could be blue, it could be green, whatever you want it to be. It doesn't need to be, the accent color doesn't need to be like wherever it is on the image here. You could make this image all grayscale with just green sunglasses and green highlights on the sweater. Or you could, keep this beautiful red color that's in here and bring attention to it by having it be like that single accent color. So it's a fun way to make a painting, is to just have there be black and white with a single accent color. And it's something that I've done quite a bit with my studies, is to sort of compress and play with the color palette. And it does what we were talking about here today a little bit, which is to interpret the reference in ways that give us some more creativity on it, looking into it beyond just the colors and the values that we see in the reference, but looking for something that is, just some layers of it we're working with and some layers we're tossing out. So if you have any questions, we've got a little bit of time here. I ran through this faster than I normally do. This is one of the very few times where I'm actually under time instead of overtime. So if anybody wants to raise their hand to ask questions about the homework or ask questions about the assignment this week, feel free. Draw this or take a literal photo. The answer is that you should draw it. You should reproduce it in whatever digital painting program or traditional media you want to. If anybody has any questions for me, feel free to raise your hand. I can bring you up on stage, or you can ask questions in the chat. We got somebody coming up right now. Well, maybe not. Can you show an example of a color study with an accent color? I can do that, yes. Chris Wolf, hello.
Hello. I was gonna ask, 'cause I feel like people are gonna struggle with this, including me.
Really?
When we go to do her clothes, I was gonna say, do you have any tips when it comes to doing all those individual holes in there that she has on her clothing?
Don't draw all the holes.
Okay, so just kind of ignore them a bit.
I would
So I was like,
say
oh my god. No.
in some areas, what you should do is you should pick out some areas where you demonstrate the texture of it, and then you leave other areas more flat, and you will find that there is a nice balance where if you look for the areas of highest contrast and pull out some of those bits and then leave the other ones vague, you'll find your brain does a lot of the work.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to ask, 'cause I was like, I know I'm gonna be asking that question.
Oh, okay. No,
So-
it's a good question. Yeah, I was a little worried about that when I assigned this. I was like, nah, they'll figure it out.
All right. Well, thank you so much, sir.
My pleasure. So I brought up a piece here that is, as you can see, the figure's all black and white, and then I am only using one color on here, which is pink, and then I've got a blue background. I've kind of cheated. I don't know if I exactly have ones that are just using one color. This one is like monochrome as well. Done this where this was, two accent colors. I've got red and gold. But reducing the color palette is something I did in my studies quite a bit. And we're just going to try to keep it to like one single color added in, and try to use that in a creative way that builds a bit of a unique artistic expression. Yeah, the mesh, the feel of crochet. It's an interesting challenge to try to draw the crochet. I would say try to figure out how to be as lazy as possible with it. That's going to give you the best possible results. Also, remember that you're only doing one accent color, which means that the majority of what you're going to be doing is going to be in black and white. So you don't actually need to have like green threads and blue threads and yellow threads. This is all going to be black and white, and you're just going to need to pull out a single accent color somewhere inside of here. And when you reduce it down to just values like this, you can squint and see that, like, you can see the texture of like the swimsuit or bra that she's got underneath here, and just observe like these broader shapes, and then put some like another layer or some texture over the top of it. That if you can get like a loose texture that has the same broad value composition as what's in the reference, you're golden. You're fine. So we say one color we have the different kind of color we choose, like a bright blue, deep blue, etc. Yep, this is going to be black and white with one color accent. I'm planning on doing like a list of 30 of these prompts that I released together. I wrote up a bunch of ideas, and I realized as I'm going over them before the classes, a bunch of them need example images to demonstrate the idea that I'm going for here. So I'm doing my best trying to like word my way through this, but I might need to start doing demos for these assignments before I give them. I typically put the assignment together the hour before I go live, but I might have to switch up my schedule and do the study the week beforehand so I can demonstrate what I'm talking about. All right, so if that's it, we are going to end just a little bit early today because if there's no big questions to ask, doesn't need to be about homework, but if you guys have any parting questions, happy to answer anything that you guys have been running into in Photoshop, digital painting, whatever. And then I'm glad that you think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be a fun, easy one this week. And so just post that up in the homework channel. I'm going to select around 5 to 7 pieces to review next week. You have the opportunity to talk to me live on stage, but even if you don't make it, you can check out the response in the VOD. I will do my best to be of service, and I will see you back here next week at 5 p.m. Eastern. Have a good one, you guys. I'll see you around.